Welcome to another episode of Stats and Scheme. I am Shawn Syed, joined as always by my good friend, a lover of a good graph and good data, Seth. You asked me to wake up a little bit earlier today. You wanted to record before our regular time. Why don't you tell the people what you have going on today?
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited for this episode, but had to get this recording done before I head to Ford Field for Bowling Green, Minnesota. Many people are saying this is the real national championship game. With the committee, we don't know exactly what game is the actual national championship. So I'm declaring this game the national championship game, and I'm very excited to watch it with my friends and my cousin.
I don't know if we can all get on board with that, but all right, real quick, we ask important questions here. So in all these bowl games, you see like the coach get dumped with Gatorade, but now they get dumped with something else. It's like French fries and things like that. So I chose 3 bowl names. You have to choose one of these 3 to get dumped on you. We got the avocados for Mexico Cure Bowl, so that'll be avocados. The All-State Sugar Bowl, so that would be sugar, and then the Wasabi Fenway Bowl. So would you rather have avocados, sugar, or wasabi dumped on you in your Gatorade shower after you win your national championship?
I didn't play football like you, Shawn, so I'm a little weak. So I feel like the avocados would hurt actually getting dumped on me. So I'm gonna have to go with the sugar. I love sugar. I think I'm actually addicted to it, and I think it would be fun to have that around me. If I ended up winning a bowl game. Where do you stand on this?
Okay, I think that's a really bad answer because you get the sugar's going to be in your socks. It's going to be in your shirt. You're going to have your post game interview. You're going to be like sticky for the rest of the day. That's like a multi-day kind of issue if you go with the sugars. Wasabi, like you obviously don't want that in your eyes. You don't want anything like that. I think you just take the hit on the avocados. I agree with you. I do think they would hurt a fair bit, but I don't know. The alternative of having sugar just kind of stuck everywhere for a few days is rough. And where's that game being played today?
Ford Field.
Ford Field. Okay, so we got Ford Field. We got to talk about, we'll start with the Lions. The first time in either of our lifetimes that the Detroit Lions have won the division. How does that feel for someone that's in that general area? Do you think like people on that train going in are just going to be just still wearing Lions gear from yesterday, or what's going on there?
I mean, it's a really great feeling. I think when you look at the Lions, 30 years since they last won the division title, it wasn't even called the NFC North the last time they hosted a home playoff game. And I think it's like just an accumulation of a lot of things that the Lions have done to get to this point from a roster building standpoint and from a culture building standpoint. And all of those things really came together this season, especially when they had a month of play where they didn't play that well, and they were able to rebound these last 2 or 3 weeks and really put this together to take home the division title, which, taking advantage of a division in a down year with the Bears going through, rebuilding year, the Vikings not having Kirk Cousins, the Packers also going through a rebuilding year, but Lions were able to take care of business, I think, which was really impressive for them.
Yeah, really good for the Lions. I like you mentioned kind of those unquantifiable things like culture, and maybe we can figure out a way to quantify it. But it's so great to see Dan Campbell doing that. And I think in this game, we can just kind of focus on the Lions offense versus the Vikings defense. Going in, right, we thought that Brian Flores has given Jared Goff a bunch of trouble in the past, and really he's given a lot of quarterbacks trouble this whole year. And, Minnesota came out with that kind of 6-1 look. I thought Detroit had a good plan between some high lows, a bit of that kind of middle of the field attack, but really able to take advantage of that off coverage with swing passes to the flats, kind of those quick throws, and really trusting your receivers or your running back to kind of break one tackle when Minnesota wants to be in that off coverage. And it felt like Detroit took some lessons from teams like Cincinnati, where now we're really seeing teams able to kind of attack this Minnesota pass defense with, that dagger concept where you have that inside guy going vertical, that outside guy running in cut, because the way that Minnesota wants to play that kind of like funky shell of a coverage, it's just difficult to do that. So how'd you feel kind of a little bit about that Lions offense versus the Vikings defense?
Yeah, so you mentioned the 6-1 look, and I think that was a very popular topic coming out of the 2018 Super Bowl between the Patriots and Rams, where it was Jared Goff versus Brian Flores, like it was in this game. And the Rams didn't have many answers to that look that Flores and Belichick threw at them, and that's why they only scored 3 points on the way to the Patriots winning the Super Bowl. In this game, Ben Johnson's answer to the 6-1 look was a really low average depth of target. Jared Goff had a 3.4 ADOT in this game, which is first percentile. This was especially true in the second half, where they had a 2.1 average up the target just in the second half alone. It was a lot of short passes, a lot of screens, and getting the ball in the playmakers' hands, and it worked. Like the Lions had 160 yards after the catch in this game, a 0.38 EPA per play, which is 87th percentile. So is that the usual counter to 6-1 fronts? Is a lower average at the target, or is that something that is more unique from what the Lions did in this game?
Well, I think it's certainly a good counter when you feel like your guys in the open field can break those tackles. Like in that 6-1 front, if those edge defenders are kind of drop out a little bit, they're usually dropping kind of a little bit outside the hashes. So they're not always darting straight to the flat. So I thought that Detroit did a pretty good job of taking advantage of that, where it's just, as simple as let's throw a swing to Jahmyr Gibbs, or they used Amon-Ra St. Brown in motion a little bit and had him in the flat, where, you get a pretty much a running start with that guy. If the defender is still kind of chasing that's a really good way to get there. And I just thought overall, like that, the passing attack early on was like, it was healthy on that first drive. I thought they drove down, scored right away, and they looked impressive from the start. But something that was so impressive was, Jahmyr Gibbs, just so explosive. Even he was on that fumble he like spun away from Harrison Smith, who was kind of in between. Should I attack the quarterback? Should I just tackle the running back? And like so much explosiveness on his touchdown. I think we have him at top 5 in yards created on the season. And that just shows on the tape. I do think another thing that shows on the tape, it feels like he's just like trusting the whole like overall blocking scheme just a little bit more. I think in that first game against the Chiefs, there was maybe like 1 or 2 examples where you're like, oh, you could be just a touch more patient, but it's great to see him continue to get those reps, rep after rep. And now he just looks like, he looks super smooth in the offense. And I feel like we mentioned every time we think about Gibbs, like our draft position and all that kind of stuff. But at this point in the season, he is really, really doing well. And then also just want to shout out David Montgomery, who I think anytime you play Minnesota, you do have to have a really, really willing blocker at the running back position. A lot of times the offensive line will just a way to deal with, all right, well, we have 7 guys up front. They'll slide one way and then have the running back go ahead and take the end on the other side. And that's not really that easy to do. Especially if you have to do it over and over against a Vikings defender who's, so used to blitzing and is so kind of jacked up for that. So that running back core between those two it's just been really, really fun to watch for Detroit.
A lot of people questioned why Jahmyr Gibbs wasn't playing more at the beginning of the season and why he wasn't getting more rushes and even just like on-field snaps. And what I thought it came down to was his pass blocking efficiency wasn't there yet. He wasn't a great pass blocker in college. Obviously a super dynamic rusher and receiver for Alabama, but not a great pass blocker. And David Montgomery, like you mentioned, is a really good pass blocker in the backfield. And why I thought David Montgomery was getting the majority of the snaps early in the season. But now I think you've reached this point where Jahmyr Gibbs' talent is so good that you have to play him as a thunder and lightning to David Montgomery. And you just have to hope that he can hold up in pass protection, which I think he has done a better job of as of late. And like you mentioned, like he is the more explosive running back on the season. Jahmyr Gibbs has a 13.6% explosive run rate. David Montgomery is a 7.2% explosive run rate, but David Montgomery is the more successful running back on a down-to-down basis. He has a 44.1% success rate, and Jahmyr Gibbs has a 39.6% success rate. So you really have this combination of these two running backs where David Montgomery can churn out that short yardage, 2nd and 2, 3rd and 1 rushes when needed. Jahmyr Gibbs can be used on more of these outside rushes where he's missing tackles at a pretty high rate and being able to turn a lot of these rushes that are maybe only blocked for 6 and 7 yards into these 15, 20 yard rushes like he did against the Vikings.
And then they get some extra carries on 4th down. So we obviously have to give Dan Campbell a shout because it's just such a positive for a team to the way that it feels like sometimes the Eagles do it is like they're like playing to get to 4th and 1. Like they'll run it on 3rd and 6 and then hopefully they get to 4th and 1.5. But then the Lions, it's like, okay, well, we're going to try and get 8 yards on 3rd and 6. If we get 5, we're going to go ahead and run it right at you, it's just so great. I hope that I feel like coaches across the league just see that. And I think it puts so much stress on a defense. Like, I think like if you come up with kind of a simple test, it's like, if you're a fan of the defense, which would you rather have happen? Mm-hmm. And it's always punt. Like as a defense, you always want them to punt. You don't want to have to defend another down. So that I thought was really good. We got guys like Khalif Raymond making these nice catches. I thought there was like a lot of just Goff in the quick game. And the most important thing was Goff didn't combust. He didn't throw an awful pick. Obviously, I think Minnesota went to some drop 8. They were able to force like a tight window throw. Goff took 1 sack, which like, all right, fine. I mean, the coverage is doing a good job, but to not have that kind of huge negative play was really big in a game where they had to be very methodical drive after drive and really, not a ton of explosive plays, which I think is something that we love about the Lions. But going forward on 4th down, like Tish, I think we could talk about till we're blue in the face. I have to imagine the numbers by the end of the season are something like this is the most 4th downs that kind of anyone has gone for. As we talk about some of the other games, we'll kind of talk about it as well. But we're not going to talk about the defense today. I think that's something that we will have to visit in the future and probably next week. Next week, the Lions head to Dallas to play the Cowboys on Saturday night. Do you want to say anything else about your Lions, or are we good to go on to Cowboys Dolphins?
I just have a stat for the 4th downs that you brought up. Ben Baldwin does a lot of great work on 4th down decision making and has like a bot that puts out some of these decisions. And you're right, like each year it really increases pretty linearly the amount of teams that are going for it on 4th downs when the bot recommends them to. And the Lions are top 3 in that this year. The Eagles are first, going for it around 70% of the time when they could get a 1% win probability gain or more in neutral game situations. The Cardinals are second and the Lions are third. And then we see other teams that have really leaned into this, like the Cowboys, the 49ers, with Shanahan coming around to it now that he has, the best offense in the league. And that rounds out the top 5. So these are a lot of teams that are going to be playing, deep into the playoffs in January here. And so it's cool to see them, doing so well on 4th downs.
Yeah, go for it on 4th down. It's more exciting. Another thing that I feel like is such a, maybe not fully outlier, but a standout this year as we get to talking about Dolphins Cowboys. Tish, I think the kickers are just too good. I don't know what's going on. I don't know. Do we pump in wind or something? Like, do we change the ball? Do we like make them kick barefoot? Like, I don't know. Obviously, this is something I think we can like pretty easily look into after the season. But like, Tish, what is going on? Like, I think 50-yard field goals used to be something that was almost sacred, and now it's just 55, 56, 57. Like it's no problem. I don't know if you feel the same or if I'm just kind of making this up.
No, you're totally right. I mean, I saw a tweet about this, but when there was 50-yard field goals made when I was a kid, it was like a world event. Like it would be leading Sports Center, like that type of stuff. And like now 50-yard field goals are just like these casual things that kickers make. And like you even like are hopeful they can make 59, 60-yard field goals like, Jake Elliott did earlier against the Bills. And, Timo Riske had some really good research on this. And Brandon Aubrey right now is just kind of, lapping the league in his kicking efficiency when you adjust for distance and accuracy. He's at plus 8% mean field goal percentage over expected on the season, which is higher than Justin Tucker, higher than Harrison Butker. So I think these kickers have done such a good job, and both kickers in this game between Jason Sanders and Aubrey did a phenomenal job in making field goals.
Well, one day I'm gonna have to tell my nephews that they used to not be able to make these field goals and they used to not go for these 4th downs. But better for them that they'll hopefully grow up in a world that has more long field goals made and more 4th down goes. So talking about Miami, Dallas, Miami of course wins it 22-20. I like that the Cowboys receive the opening kickoff. They try to avoid some of those game script issues. Again, I like that decision. We talked about it a little bit on our spaces with our buddy Arjun Menon on Thursday. I thought the Dolphins, they kept Jalen Ramsey kind of on the offense's left. Dallas had CeeDee Lamb in the slot a bunch. They put him in motion, get him in stacks, and usually away from that outside left spot, which to me is smart because why would you throw at Jalen Ramsey when you can just attack other people instead? And that opening drive fumble was such a killer, even though that they had run that fullback dive successfully, I think twice on that drive. Then the next drive, they get CeeDee Lamb running away from that nickel spot, and the Dolphins were down one of their safeties in Javon Holland. Get a little bit of communication that's just like a touch late, and then CD is just gone. But then the next 2 drives you get after those good drives, you get punt, end of half, punt. So Tish, how'd you feel kind of overall about the Dolphins defense versus the Cowboys offense?
It was a really interesting matchup. I think that the Cowboys offense, started a little bit slow. Like you mentioned, they received the opening kickoff to try to get ahead on it. And, it ended up not going exactly, I think, how they wanted it to go. But again, it was a super high pass rate game from the Cowboys offense. They had a plus 5.1% pass rate over expected. In this game, it was very justified. They had an 84th percentile EPA per pass and only a 20th percentile EPA per rush. And obviously that big fumble at the goal line is pretty much killing their EPA per rush. That was a minus 6.7 EPA loss on that play alone. And, when you look at someone like Tony Pollard, who is in that situation to score, pretty easily on that play. And Deshaun Elliott ends up making one of the best defensive plays of the season so far and saving that touchdown on what happens on the next play. I think you have to go back if you're the Cowboys offense and realize that you really were just inches away from making this a totally different game. And it comes down to they're still doing so many things right that makes me optimistic about them despite not winning this game. CeeDee Lamb had a 31% target share in this game, which is right where he should be, when you're feeding him. 9.5 total EPA when targeted. So they're focusing a lot on him, and they are having the secondary wide receiver step up when needed, as long as it goes through Lamb first.
I'm glad you mentioned that the Cowboys were literally inches away, and it's tough sometimes when we watch the game and it's not just that a super clean narrative comes out of it, because on those last few drives, Dak is playing super, super well. So we can't just say, oh, Dolphins good, Cowboys bad. It's not as simple as that. And of course, reminds us, it's such a week-to-week league. Tej, I don't know if you could talk about for a second. So pass rate over expected, that's something I think we talk about a fair bit. And then I'm sure we'll talk about it as we get to Ravens 49ers. Can you talk maybe just like at a high level, like what is an expected pass situation? Maybe some of the things that is based on.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the chance of a pass occurring on a play takes into account the game situation variables. So what that is down, distance, yard line, time remaining in the half. But then it also takes into account win probability, which is a pretty big factor, depending on the down and distances once you account for that. And so obviously when you are losing, you are going to have a higher pass rate on average than when you're winning. That's why we often see the selection bias stats of if Jonathan Taylor goes over 100 rushes, the Colts are undefeated this season, or 100 rushing yards, the Colts are undefeated this season. Or, the Cowboys one was, if Ezekiel Elliott hits 15 plus carries, the Cowboys have like an 80% winning percentage, or there are stats like that. And so you just want to adjust for those situations basically when you're talking about an expected pass rate. So the very high expected pass situations are like 3rd and 10 plus or different or down 14 or more points. And like, that's what you're just adjusting for when you have a metric like pass rate over expected.
That makes sense. I think that's another one that we could maybe talk about in the offseason of, well, kickers doing so well. If I don't know, it feels like when we're putting out those kind of game boxes, we see a lot of those higher kind of green looking pass rates over expected. Maybe it's something that's like a historical trend. Maybe that's going linear as well. I do think in this game, thinking about it from the Dolphins defensive perspective, I'm never going to miss a chance to compliment Vic Fangio. I thought the Dolphins were able to stop the run from light boxes. The pass rush was getting through fairly well when the Cowboys were on their second tackle. And Fangio, he isn't by nature a blitzer. That's not, I think, something that he hangs his hat on. But they had 3 really, really well-timed ones that were good. But overall, they wanted to be in that rush 4, cover with 7, be flexible on the back end. And they're less about spinning in super dramatic ways where we think of Spagnuolo and the Chiefs sometimes doing that in seasons past. But their coverage is cool because it is going to express differently based on what the routes are that the offense presents. So it's not just going to be static, but you can have the same exact call play after play and have it look totally different based on what the offense is running. And everyone across the league does zone match in certain ways, but I just love how it expresses from those safeties, particularly the way that they kind of glue themselves to route. So it felt like early on in this season, it takes a bit for everyone to get settled in. Tej, it took me and you a little bit of time to get settled in on that podcast, but now it feels like Fangio just has everyone playing so well. So they're also, they're not going to follow a receiver around as much. You don't see Jalen Ramsey chasing CeeDee Lamb. Of course, as we talked about before, Dallas did a good job kind of moving CeeDee around. But I mean, Dak was really, really running around back there a bunch with Van Ginkel and Chubb kind of both having success, and Dolphins just forcing them to really, really grind out plays. I mean, Tej, that last drive was like 17 plays or something. Mm-hmm. We get kind of eight chances on the goal line, or I think it ended up being like 7 plays that ends up in a touchdown. So like I said, you'd like to have a clean narrative, but Dak played really well at the end. And the Dolphins defense, I thought, week after week has continued to just put on good tape, especially as Jalen Ramsey kind of entered back into that lineup.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about this because you've done so much work on the Fangio system and also studying what Jalen Ramsey has done for defenses. So, Dolphins rank top 3 in defensive EPA per play since Jalen Ramsey has returned. That also has coincided with just taking more time for these players like David Long and Shawn to learn the new system that Fangio has. Where do you kind of assign the piece of the pie of the Dolphins defense having such a big improvement from the first half of the season to the second half of the season? Do you think it's more Ramsey, more just experience in the system, combination of the both? Where do you kind of land on that?
Yeah, that is a really good question. I think it's hard to answer because of course, like I think of it first as well. It just takes a little bit of time, and sometimes there's kind of a magic moment where now the linebackers trust the safeties and the nickel understands when to kind of push her out inside. At the same time, when you put Jalen Ramsey there, it gives you so much comfort on the backside of 3x1s. It almost like a little bit kind of cuts the field in half for offenses where I don't think offenses are particularly interested in attacking Ramsey. So now they're going to kind of put the strength of their formation the other way. Now the defense can send the nickel that way. They can devote more resources. So I do think it works in combination. And I was interested this year to see that, Fangio didn't just stick Ramsey at that nickel spot where, of course, we saw him do a bunch of fun things with the Rams. He said, no, Ramsey can still play as a dominant outside cornerback and let leave him there. So I think that's a testament to Fangio. So, as usual, Tish, you give me these complicated questions. I'm just going to punt it straight through the back of the end zone because I do think it really is a combination of people got to trust it. Throwing Ramsey in there really, really supercharges it. But, a fun one to watch down the stretch. We'll talk, I'm sure, next week about that Dolphins-Ravens game. But let's flip over to the other side here. We got Dolphins offense versus Cowboys defense. Heading into this matchup, we were both really curious how much of that, Dan Quinn 5-down cover 1 we were going to see, and then what was Miami going to do in the run game, where we saw a few weeks where now the Cowboys run defense on that interior was getting beaten up a little bit. From a coverage perspective, I think we can look at the numbers, but it certainly felt like the Cowboys were playing a little bit more zone than usual. And that light personnel inside with that speed was able to deal with some of those edge runs. And Dallas, frankly, was able to kind of create explosive plays on the defensive end with some of those negative runs. And, over time, I do think you can tell that Dallas really misses Jonathan Hankins inside on some of those vertical runs, but I do think they were better kind of overall fitting the run. So, Tej, why don't you give us some initial thoughts on the Cowboys defense versus the Dolphins offense?
I'm totally with you. I was really impressed by Dallas's ability to fit the run in this game. The stats back that up. The Dolphins only had a 26th percentile EPA per rush in this game. They also had a pretty strong negative play rate, which was stemming from a lot of those rushes being tackled in the backfield. But, it's a give and take league as we've talked about many times. And, to stop the run as well as Dallas did in this game, they were more susceptible to giving up explosive passes. And that is what the Dolphins do to people. It's nothing against Dallas's defense in particular, but the Dolphins were just able to lean on their explosive pass game in this game, which they really needed to because they had been so good at running the ball for much of the season, but that was not available to them in this game. And so the 50-yard reception to Jalen Waddle was huge. The 3 15-plus yard receptions to Tyreek Hill were massive. And then they were able to mix in some secondary receivers in these explosive passing plays. Durham Smythe had a 21-yard reception. Robbie Chosen, got his name right, was a 19-yard reception. Then Cedric Wilson also had an 18-yard reception. So that was really good for the Dolphins to know that they can get into their explosive passing game without having a run game that was as explosive as it usually was throughout the season.
Tish, can you maybe check on the chart real quick? Where was their explosive play rate at? Because I did feel like the Cowboys defense did play well enough to win the game. They forced however many field goals, and Michael Parsons feels like he's dominating regardless of how many flags. So I don't know if you have it up what their explosive play rate was. The Dolphins offense.
Dolphins had a 12.9%.
Maybe what their percentile was to give it a better perspective.
Yeah, 12.9% explosive play rate, which is 75th percentile.
Okay, 70. Wow. Okay. I mean, I guess watching it, I would have felt maybe it was a little bit lower, but it feels like every one of their completions, when they actually do complete a pass, it is an explosive player. It's so easy for them to get the kind of yards after catch. Because again, I do feel like the Cowboys defense played well enough to win. I thought for Miami, that drive kind of before the half was interesting because it was Tua being really comfortable underneath on those quick throws, not even worrying about some of those explosive when you can just kind of chip away at it. And then you saw it again on that last drive of the game where it's screens and quick game when the clock is ticking down and you're in like a must-have moment, like you're throwing these screens, and it's awesome, I guess, to watch as a Dolphins fan to see them able to move the ball down the field. And where I thought Dallas did play a little more zone than usual earlier in the game, when it's crunch time, they go to man, and then you got Tyreek Hill on that motion where I think you tweeted out where Tyreek Hill's like the first person to kind of juke out the defender while still in motion, and really, really smart screen call, I think, from Mike McDaniel there. And, Tua deserves credit to me for his like no step throws where he's just catching the ball and not even taking a full drop, because I think something that's hard in every offense is how does a quarterback time up their steps to the routes that are happening. And especially when you're a little bit more throwing to spots because things happen so fast. I mean, sometimes Tua just can't take a step. So it's really kind of a catch, torque, and throw. So that was really fun. And then just another one, a nice design to Mostert on that touchdown where teams like running that kind of away from the trips, a running back from the backfield kind of leaking out, and then a crosser from the ISO side as well. But they did it kind of bumping a running back from one side to the other. So that was a fun one. I don't know, Tish, if you have any kind of thoughts and feelings on how kind of Miami just like they were able to do it really on those two drives, checking the ball down and taking some of those easier throws.
Yeah, before I get into my last point about Miami's offense, was that Mostert touchdown something that the Bills ran with Joe Brady a couple weeks ago? I remember thinking it looked similar at the time, but I didn't know for sure if that was the same concept.
Yeah, it was the Bills. It was the 49ers had run it in that same week. One other team ran it in that week as well. But then there was also like, it's not historically a McVay play, but McVay and LaFleur really, really pushed it out. They called it Cowboy. I think it might have been in 2019 that they were running it a bunch. So it's definitely a play like this is across the NFL. It makes a ton of sense. You're sending three guys from one side to make all of this traffic, especially if a team is man coverage. And then I like that the running back is the player that's crossing kind of to the other side, because you're sending that whole wave of traffic at really a linebacker. So if a linebacker is going to make their way in space, that is not the easiest thing to do. And then you have that backside isolated kind of shallow cross as well. So yeah, that's a play that I think we're just going to keep on seeing it. The Chiefs love it. Andy Reid is definitely a big fan of it as well. So definitely a favorite red zone play, I think, across the NFL.
That's awesome. I do like that play a lot. It's cool to see how that's spread across the league. But yeah, my last point about the Dolphins offense was Alec Ingold does need a shout out on the show. I mean, from a fullback's perspective, like I think what he does to the Dolphins offense is so underrated. And I've talked to people about this before, and then have heard a similar sentiment around people in the league. And like, I think when you look at the Dolphins in this game, 11 personnel, they had a 0.01 EPA per play, which is slightly below league average. But when you looked at them with 21 personnel, so when they had two running backs, one tight end on the field, they did 0.16 EPA per play, which is, very, very high end offensive production. And that was evident in this game with what Alec Ingold was able to do, in the run game, clearing up lanes for Mostert and A-Chain, but also what he's able to do in the pass game, keeping him in the backfield to seal the backside of a lot of their pass concepts. I was impressed by that. And the metrics did back that up in this game.
Tish, Alec Ingold. I mean, you're never gonna hear me say anything bad about Alec Ingold or Kyle Juszczyk, frankly, and even Pat Ricard as a little fullback as he plays anymore. Feels like every year they get less and less, but it's such an important tool, because I think particularly because Ingold is really versatile. He doesn't just have to block. He can actually. I mean, he's not gonna run the same route as Tyreek Hill, but he is an actual threat. Kind of, you can't just kind of leave him alone, and he doesn't have stone hands by any means. So I love seeing Ingold there, and I do think Ingold affords McDaniel so much flexibility there. Anything else on the kind of Dolphins, or do you think it's time to get to the meat of 49ers Ravens?
Yeah, let's move on to 49ers Ravens here.
Yeah, before moving on, that Joe Brady, they called that because he was at LSU, and then in the LSU install, they called that play Slither. So it's like, it's fun to see a play in the playbook in 2019 for LSU being run now with the Bills. So you love to see those things. Obviously, when we talk about playbooks, I mean, we can't talk about playbooks without talking about our guy, Kyle Shanahan. But the Ravens, Ravens really, really impressed in this one. Obviously, the Ravens will go and play the Dolphins next week. But so we're obviously going to have to look at the All-22. The game played last night. But even from the TV copy, just a game of so many formations and personnels that really feels like, Tish, I know how much you love personnel diversity. I think both teams did a really, really good job. I think we can start with 49ers offense versus Ravens defense. one of those snaps earlier on, we were really interested to see, well, what is Mike McDonald going to do against all these fun things that the 49ers do? What is he going to do when the running back kind of bumps out in that motion? I thought early on, it felt like there was that kind of edge blitz, get that empty free runner. That's, I think, a smart way to be able to handle it. There was that kind of big George Kittle play early on, just like a little bit of miscommunication. I thought that the 49ers early on were using those high lows to kind of control the middle of the field a little bit, which the 49ers do better than kind of anyone in the NFL. You got Brandon Ayuk blocking linebackers. You get that back shoulder throw to Deebo Samuel, which is really nice. But, you end up with 4 interceptions from Brock Purdy. I think one more from Sam Darnold. So I ended up with 5 interceptions for the Ravens. There was an awesome clip at the end of McDonald on the sideline, just so fired up, I think, after just an incredible performance. Then when you go through the interceptions, I do think that first one, I think, is fairly clearly on Purdy. He's that's like a route going through that kind of middle of the field. Not that that's a dead route, but really there's only a few, or there's not, that look is not the one I think that you should be attacking there. I think Kyle Shanahan said it after the post-game press conference, so I feel comfortable that it's not just kind of a guess there. And then you have the interception where Purdy, and the 49ers do this, well, they'll run kind of wide zone one way and Purdy's peeking to the cornerback or that same side to maybe throw a kind of quick throw. Cornerback makes an incredible play. You get that pass rusher that's able to knock that ball out of Purdy's hands on a kind of, I think it was a choice route where McCaffrey's coming across the middle of the field, ends up in an interception. So just like a wild day, not something that I expected. I certainly expected the 49ers to go in there and maybe even win by 6 points there. But how is your kind of feeling overall about the 49ers offense versus the Ravens defense?
Really like a lot of the stuff you said there. And when you think about the 49ers offense and how they're set up, they're pretty uniquely set up to attack all levels of the field. You have, your lower level stuff with oftentimes with Christian McCaffrey. You have your middle of the field stuff with George Kittle and Deebo Samuel. And then you have your deeper routes with Brandon Ayuk and some other receivers like Ronnie Bell working in there, and Brock Purdy's ability to throw those more often than Jimmy Garoppolo. When you look at the Ravens defense in this game, and it wasn't really evident until we saw this game being played out, they're pretty well set up to stop each level of the field because what they have at defensive line with Jadeveon Clowney and Justin Madubuike, they have Roquan Smith playing as an all-pro level linebacker, and Patrick Queen playing at a higher level because of that ability that they have when they are both on the field together. And then Kyle Hamilton is playing like the best safety in the league right now. And the Ravens defensive backs can fill in around him. So they are able to stop each level of a team's offensive attack, which wasn't particularly something that I thought of going into this game, but now I realize now, and I'm really impressed by that. And, I often make fun of the keys to the game that broadcasts give out, and it's always like stuff like stop them on third down and force turnovers, but that really is the game plan against the 49ers. They're too successful on a down-to-down basis for you to beat them straight up. You really do need to force turnovers against them. And that is what the Ravens were able to do in this game. In their 4 losses this year, the 49ers have had a 47.2% success rate, which is equivalent to the 5th best in the NFL among all teams in every game. That's the 2nd best success rate of teams in just games that they've lost behind the Buffalo Bills. And even in this game, they had a 43rd percentile success rate, but it didn't feel like that because of the 5 interceptions, like you mentioned. So that's exactly what Baltimore needed to do in this game to come away with the victory.
And then some of those drives where San Francisco is able to have more success, it was leaning on Christian McCaffrey, which I think that makes sense. And it felt like McDonald's kind of point was we need to make Brock Purdy win the game. It's not going to, obviously McCaffrey was able to find success, and it's easy to say, oh, we're going to stop Christian McCaffrey. He's still going to be able to have a lot of successful runs, but it's smart, I think, to as much as you can. And you're right that not every team can do this because the Ravens are really actually unique at the talent level on defense. And as I really like that you mentioned, kind of at all of the levels. So I don't know, do you think that tells us anything about roster management or team structure, or is it more just, if you have special players, like you're at an advantage? I'm not sure if this is going to make you draft a linebacker kind of in round 1 where, maybe it's harder to project that as opposed to when you find it out later on kind of through a player's career.
Yeah, that's a great question. And a lot of the reason why you don't want to draft linebackers in the first round or second round that often is because the slope of their draft pick and then how well they actually perform in the NFL is pretty flat relative to other positions. So I think when you bring up that point of the Ravens knew what they were getting in Roquan Smith when they made that trade, it was a known. And, you can talk about the value of giving up a draft pick and a big contract for a non-premium position. It's something that teams are not recommended to do that often, but in particular situations where you have this all-star defensive coordinator, you are able to fill in your defensive line every year by signing just whatever free agent is available in August, like they did with Jadeveon Clowney. And then you have a really good feeling about your secondary. I think it ended up working out really well for the Ravens because you had all of those ingredients together that created this perfect situation for them to go into. And Eric Eager, the guy who hosts the show on Mondays and Wednesdays, has done a lot of research into why pass rush is different than coverage from the sense of stability and then also where you can get those players from. And the Ravens are a good example of finding the pass rush later once you filled in the coverage picture for the rest of your team.
We talk about linebackers. I think Roquan Smith was first round. I think he was pick 8, and then Fred Warner, who we'll talk about on the opposite end, was pretty sure he was a 3rd rounder. So it's interesting to see. Obviously, Roquan Smith not with the team that drafted him now. But all right, so how do we think about this game where there's 5 interceptions, really 4 interceptions from the starting quarterback there? When we think about, well, what if these two teams play again in the Super Bowl? Obviously, we'll talk about Ravens offense in a second and the awesomeness that is Lamar Jackson, but like in your head, how do you put it when this was certainly a low-end outcome for the 49ers? It felt like this was a pretty high-end outcome for the Ravens. And of course, the game is the game. We don't get to kind of take that back and say, oh, in a game that had less interceptions. But if they're to play again, we probably assume that you don't get 3 bats of a ball that end up in a Ravens player's hand. So how do you kind of treat that in your head if we think about them playing again in the Super Bowl?
That's a great thing to bring up. And I think that if they do end up playing in the Super Bowl, which, I wouldn't be opposed to, it was a really fun matchup to watch. Would love to watch it again. The 49ers would probably be favored over the Ravens. And that might come as a surprise to some people, but just from a pure team rating perspective, the 49ers are around 2.5 to 3 points better than any team in the league right now. And I think the Ravens have moved up to that second team in team ratings. The 49ers are still the favorite to win the Super Bowl on FanDuel and DraftKings this morning when I was looking at the odds. So I still think that the odds makers see themselves as the best team in the NFL, and they have the highest ELO rating of any team on sumersports.com. So 28% chance that the 49ers win the Super Bowl is what we have, and then 21.7% chance that the Ravens win it. Obviously, the Ravens are going to have to go through a little bit of a tougher road to get to the Super Bowl, but I think even then the 49ers would be favored by around 2.5 or 3 points on the opening spread.
Certainly still think that the 49ers are favored in the NFC, but the Ravens, they have impressive wins really over totally beat down the Lions. I know you remember that from week 7, really beat down the Seahawks as they were kind of emerging. Obviously this win over the 49ers is a really big one. So let's talk a little bit about Ravens offense versus 49ers defense before we get out of here. Really early on, it was so fun to see Fred Warner, just a total missile, stunting around, able to make some tackles in the backfield, and just a great, awesome linebacker versus awesome linebacker matchup. Are we going to talk about the ref in the end zone? Probably not. I think we can kind of leave that one overall. I thought that the Ravens offensive line did maybe a little bit better of a job than I was expecting. Of course, they had some injuries up front. They've had some injuries up front through the whole entire year. It seemed like the 49ers were doing a little bit of that mush rush where you're not just totally jetting off the ball. You don't want to leave kind of a huge lane, but I think it was around drive 3 or 4 where the Ravens and Monken, they started leaning more into RPOs. Let's conflict those linebackers, especially if they're going to play in zone. And sure, Fred Warner can cover like 8 things at once, but make him kind of fill that gap inside where you can get kind of a slant behind it. And I think that it certainly felt like from watching it that there was a high pass rate over expected. My guess is that the numbers kind of back that up because they were really saying, if we're going to win this game, it's going to be through Lamar. And it felt like that really ended up paying off. Of course, like we talked about the other teams, the Ravens had, I think, a good example of going forward on 4th down, and maybe an example where I think me and you would have liked to see them go for it. But overall, just like a high time to throw game where Lamar, I think, will probably always have a little bit higher of a percentile of time to throw than other players, and rightfully so, because he's so magic in and outside of the pocket. And I really like that he is able to make life so stressful for a secondary. I think some of the holding calls on the defense only get called when Lamar is able to break that pocket a little bit, and you have to cover for like 4, 5, and 6 seconds, and that's just frankly too hard for a defender to do. So Tej, I don't know if you had any thoughts overall or anything specific on the Ravens offense versus the 49ers defense.
Yeah, you're right. The Ravens had a plus 8% pass rate over expected in this game, which is 86th percentile. And the 49ers see the highest pass rate over expected against in the league as a defense. They cause teams to pass more than the average defense. Is that something that they do specifically on defense, in your opinion, or is that teams wanting to keep up with the opposing offense on the other end, causing them to pass more?
Probably a little bit of both. When I was thinking about this, I thought about it from like the 49ers probably have the best box in the NFL between those guys up front and those linebackers. So to me, it's a little bit of a commentary of if you're looking at the 49ers defense, obviously they have, I mean, Ward's been playing really, really well on the outside as of late. But if you're going to attack one spot, it's probably going to be, all right, they're on their, what is it, third safety now after injury to Hufanga. You want to challenge those cornerbacks a little bit, make life a little bit harder on the nickel, as opposed to, are we going to run it? Like Hargrave is playing so awesome, and it feels like Philly's almost missing him a little bit more than maybe they expected. And obviously, Bosa and Young have been playing really well on the outside. So I think, it's a little bit of both. Of course, if you're going to play against the 49ers, you really have to ramp it up. And I mean, I think I said in our group chat, like the Ravens need 35 today, where, I was wrong. They could have afforded fewer points than that. But a combination where I lean a little bit more towards just, if you're going to attack a defense in some type of way, let's maybe not run it directly at Fred Warner. How do you feel about that one?
Right. Yeah. I think I agree with you. I just wanted to hear you out on that, but that definitely makes a lot of sense about that box being so good. And then, really the only weakness of their team, outside of maybe some offensive guard spots is like cornerback. And that's something that opposing offenses want to attack. So that is an interesting way to think about it. And, what I was most impressed about in this game was that Ravens drop back game just as a whole. Like, I think it's been so cool to watch Lamar stylistically change how he plays from Greg Roman's offense last year to Todd Monken's offense this year, in a sense where it's benefiting them in multiple ways. Not only is Lamar able to keep himself healthier throughout the season so far because he's putting himself on less scrambles, he's also just buying time in the pocket, causing holdings, like you mentioned, causing, the receivers, allowing the receivers to get open more downfield. Lamar only scrambled twice in this game. He only was on 4 design rushes. Almost all of the Ravens offensive production in this game came from the passing game. And, when we look at the MVP odds here, Lamar Jackson is now the favorite to win MVP. He is going to be the first quarterback in a long time, if he ends up winning it, to win MVP without ranking in the top 5 or even top 10 of EPA per play. And, I think there are just some things that you have to think about when you notice that disparity between MVP and where they rank in EPA. One of them is Gus Edwards has scored 11 touchdowns from the +3 yard line or closer this season. If those are all, Lamar Jackson rushes, his stats would look a lot different on multiple fronts right now. But the other thing is, I don't know if the current stats that we have can fully measure Lamar Jackson's impact on the team, because I think he impacts every play more than the average quarterback does, because edge rushers have a slower get off speed against Lamar Jackson because they have to worry about him breaking the pocket. Linebackers will often carry with him more, even when he's handing the ball off to the running back and going in the opposite direction. And then everything that you mentioned with making defenders have to cover for extra time while he scrambles and moves around in the pocket. I think that, a lot of the, really smart people at Sumer are working on stuff to measure his impact better. But currently, like whether you use yards per play or EPA or, any of those metrics, I don't know if they can fully measure his impact, which is why I think I'm fine with him winning MVP if it comes down to that.
Well, Tej, we don't call the show stats and stats. It's stats and scheme. I think that there's probably, I know Eric Eager's worked a lot on a stat that I think is really, really good in terms of encompassing who is kind of like how much is a player worth, who is the most valuable player in the league. I would argue that, no stat really encompasses that. I do think stats do an incredible job of capturing a lot of it. I just think this game was kind of easy when you look at it. Obviously, a really, really bad bounce of the ball for Brock Purdy, but like Lamar Jackson and Brock Purdy like they're playing two so different games where, as you said, the pass rate over expected is really high for the Ravens. Baltimore is saying, like, we do not win this game unless Lamar Jackson is like playing with his hair on fire. And he was able to do that, and they're able to find success. Obviously, a lot of it because of the defense. So who do I think is MVP? I don't know, Tish, because next week we get Dolphins, Ravens. Say the Dolphins beat the Ravens. Now we're doing the Tua Tyreek MVP. And then in week 18, we get Bills, Dolphins. The Bills beat them. Now we do the Josh Allen MVP. So it obviously, I mean, it's no fun to just complain about, the MVP and the narrative and this, that, and the other thing. As you know, for me, just give everyone an award. I'm team participation trophy. All these players are so incredible. If I had to choose one, I'm not really sure, because the cop out is always to say, just give it to Mahomes. But some funky things going on in Kansas City. I would kind of love to see the thing where we get 3 weeks in a row where it's, okay, now we're all in on Lamar, and then the Dolphins win, we're all in on Tua Tyreek, and then the Bills win, and we're all in on Josh Allen. Because I think it's important. Obviously, neither of us have MVP votes. I just think it's important that there is a dialogue about how we view MVP. Maybe we should split the award up. Let's make it most valuable quarterback, most valuable offensive player, away from that. But okay, so aside from that, so next week we got Lions at Cowboys on Saturday. Huge 2-seed implications for Detroit, for Philly, and then maybe for San Francisco at that 1 seed if they end up losing. As I said, we got the Dolphins at Ravens early on Sunday, where I think that game might just be for the 1 seed a little bit. If Miami's able to win, I think they'd have the same record, but Miami would have a head-to-head tiebreaker. I mean, how are we feeling about next week? Lions at Cowboys, Dolphins at Ravens. I think that might not be as fun of a slate as this week, but still 2 really, really good games.
Very excited for that, for sure. I haven't seen a team have as high of a team total as the Cowboys have against a division champion, and probably my entire lifetime. I think the Cowboys, have a team total of like 30 points next week against the Lions. So a lot of points in that game. And then, it'll be awesome to watch both sides of the ball in Ravens Dolphins. It's a lot of the stuff that we've talked about on this show throughout the whole year. So it's really cool to see it come together here in week 17, right before, the New Year's and everything. Will be a lot of fun to watch it.
All right, Judge, let's get out of here. We all know you got a bowl game to go to. That's going to be fun for you. So thank you, everyone, for listening to another episode of Stats and Scheme. Tell us what you like, what you didn't like, and if you think Tej is just crazy for choosing the sugar Gatorade bath. Just a ridiculous choice from a good friend of mine, Tej. Everyone, make sure you visit our website at sumersports.com. Follow us on Twitter at sumersports. Like, rate, subscribe. Tell a friend. But most importantly, enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you next time.